Welcome to the American Folklife Center's 2025 Homegrown Concert Series. I'm Stephen Winnick. The Homegrown Concert Series tries to feature the best in traditional music and dance from around the world right here in Washington, D.C. And today we are very happy to have with us Louis Michaud and Layla McCullough. So we are going to talk to them a little bit about their careers before we begin the concert. And you should know that if you come across this video on the Library of Congress website and you don't see a concert with it, then you can do a search on our website and you'll find the concert as well. So there's a separate video concert on the Library of Congress website. So here we are with Louis Michaud and Layla McCullough. Louis is a Grammy-winning musician with the Lost Bayou Ramblers and an activist in preserving Louisiana music as well as environmental preservation. We'll talk to you a little about that. And Layla McCullough has played here at the Library of Congress before with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and she's also been a member of Our Native Daughters, and she's a multi-instrumentalist, a singer and songwriter of many talents. So it's great to meet you, Louis, and it's great to see you again, Layla.
Great to meet you.
Thanks, Steve.
So because most of your careers are separate from each other, I'm going to interview each of you a little bit separately and then bring it together for talking about the projects that you're involved in together. So we're going to start with Layla, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So let's just begin with you telling us a little about your musical background and your background in general.
Sure. Well, I started playing the cello through the public school system in Maplewood, New Jersey, where I grew up. I was born in Queens, New York, but my parents, my family's from Haiti. Both of my parents emigrated to the United States in the 60s, and so me being a cello player has been quite the surprise and a delight to everybody. I consider it the happiest accident of my life. I started getting really serious about classical music. I studied classical music intently throughout middle school and high school. When I was in high school, my family moved to Ghana in West Africa, and I was sort of taken off of my conservatory track, but had an extremely enriching experience and starting to identify myself as, part of the African diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
And I had traveled to Haiti many times as a child. And so, I mentioned that because I really feel like that was such a turning point for me in expanding what I was going to eventually end up doing with my music. When I was 18 years old, I went to a party in Brooklyn where a cellist named Rufus Cappadocia was playing a self-designed 5-string electric cello with a band called the Voodoo Drums of Haiti. And I just remember thinking, I don't know what this is or how to do any of that, but that's what my life is going to be about. And I started learning about different types of traditional music, started to learn how to play by ear, which, has become more commonplace for cello players and people from, the classical tradition, but at the time felt very like such an individual path.
Yeah.
And I found myself moving to New Orleans in 2010. I started by busking with Bach in the street and, started to really kind of understand the world of Louisiana music. And that led me back to my Haitian roots. And it certainly led me to the Lost Bayou Ramblers and my friendship with Louis.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us just a little about your other musical projects, and both historically and currently. So,
Sure.
like the Carolina Chocolate Drops, whom you visited the library with maybe 10 years ago or so.
Yeah. I can't even remember what year it was. But when I moved to New Orleans, it was really an attempt to try to define what I was going to do with music. I had a lot of creative inclinations towards composition and songwriting, and I had started to sing, and, I was starting to kind of just like figure out what I wanted to do. And I knew that I wanted to tour in a band eventually. And, one day when I was busking, I met a man named Tim Duffy, who is the founder and director of an organization called the Music Maker Relief Foundation. And at the time, he was co-managing the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and I had just learned about them. I had just started playing old time music and, going to square dances and learning about the difference between bluegrass and old time. And, um, you know, Tim Duffy saw me playing on the street, and he actually was referred to the coordinates of where I would be in the French Quarter by my sister, who was taking fiddle lessons with Phil Jameson in Asheville, North Carolina. So it's like a really wild, kind of famous story now. But Tim approached me, and I gave him this demo of songs that I had written to Langston Hughes's poetry before I left New York. I had started a project called the Langston Hughes Project, and I was writing music to Langston Hughes's poetry. And so I handed that to him, and he was like, "You need to meet Rhiannon Giddens." And he actually flew me to Greensboro, North Carolina. And I remember Rhiannon's daughter, Aoife, was about a year old. She was a brand new mother, which, to me was like, oh, okay, I could be a musician and a mom too. And now I have 3 kids,
Right.
twins, 6-year-olds and a 10-year-old. But, Rhiannon and I hit it off. And before you knew it, I was in Nashville at Buddy Miller's studio recording with them the album Leaving Eden and guesting on that record. And I guess that was sort of my audition for the band. I mean, I was so green on everything in the music industry. I remember the first time going to sound check with the Carolina Chocolate Drops and just, being afraid of the sound of my own voice in the microphone. And so it was a huge, huge learning experience for me. And beyond, the personal connections that I formed in that time, I just learned so much about the power of advocacy for these, cultural advocacy and music, talking about history through performance. And that is something that was very deeply impactful to me, and I think called to me in several ways, but something that I truly carry with me in my music now. I started, researching more about the history of Louisiana, because I would see my family names, places, and I would, there were markers of my own ancestry all over New Orleans. And the more I read about New Orleans, the more I started to notice that, and I got really curious about, what Haitian folk music really sounds like, because Haiti is such a cultural and historical imprint on Louisiana. So I got more and more curious about that, and that's how I found the Smithsonian Folkways album,
Right.
Haitian Folk Songs by Franz Cassius, that included a lot of sort of classical folk crossover compositions that he had written. And I just fell in love with that music, and it got me. And that same year, the Library of Congress released the Haiti box set,
The Haiti.
which was edited by a writer named Gage Avril, who's an expert on Haitian music, an ethnomusicologist. And I got that box set, and that was so influential as well. Full circle moment here at the Library of Congress, but it really. There were 10 different CDs and a book as a part of that. And I fell in love with the troubadour music.
Yeah.
I loved the secular folk tradition, because I grew up knowing a lot about, well, not even knowing a lot about, just being exposed to Racine and like voodoo drumming. And of course that's, there's no Haitian music without voodoo drumming. But I love the secular folk songs, because I really got to experience Haitian culture in a way that I didn't get to as a kid. And as a diaspora, we have a kind of this constant reaching back, trying to understand our roots. And so I just started to realize like how important it was to tell those stories, and to sing those stories, and to learn the language, and to learn the food. People always ask me, how do you pass this on to your kids? And I say, well, I started cooking Haitian food and and playing more Haitian music around the house, and what I'm doing with my voice. So, Haiti has been such a big part of my musical background, a big part of how I see the world. The more I learn about Haiti, the more I learn about the world.
Yeah.
But I'm also a songwriter. through the Carolina Chocolate Drops, I learned a bit about Piedmont blues guitar playing, and of course through the Music Maker Relief Foundation, through friends of mine like Louis, learned a lot about Cajun and Creole music,
Yeah.
and I have a genuine curiosity for all of these subgenres of American folk music. And also, it's really fun to be able to bring the cello into that environment because it's just not really a standard instrument, but I found a way to standardize it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I noticed looking at your discography too that you do have albums that are almost entirely in Creole, right? Do
hmm
you write songs in Haitian Creole as well as performing?
I've started to do that,
Mhm.
I started to do that. I did that a little bit on Capitalist Blues, my third record,
Right,
and even more so was pulled into that process for my fourth record, Breaking the Thermometer,
right. That's
um,
yeah.
which was an album inspired by a theater work that was commissioned by Duke University, a multimedia performance that incorporating dance and music and video projection and sound design. And that the archival research sort of required to even get to a place where I could, me and my collaborators could figure out a narrative arc to present to an audience. Um, deeply,
Yeah.
deeply enriched my sense of Creole and kind of forced that out of me, called it out of me more.
Yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned the big connection of Haiti to New Orleans and to Louisiana in general. I'll mention that, you talked about the Haiti box set, which is entirely made up of recordings made in 1937 by Alan Lomax for the Library of Congress. And we have all of those original recordings here. So anyone who wants to listen to it, the Haiti box is kind of out of print, but you can still find it.
I
But
know
but
it's very
but you can
expensive
come
on
to the
eBay.
yeah, but you can come to the library and you can still hear all those recordings here at the Library of
Yeah.
Congress. And we also have, of course, some of the earliest field recordings made of Cajun music, which were done in 1934, and they're also here at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. So that kind of brings us to Louis' work and life. So Louis, tell us a little about your musical background, your start.
Well, I'm born and raised in Baton Rouge and Lafayette, Louisiana. Born in Baton Rouge, raised in Lafayette.
All right.
My dad was he's a my dad is a scientist and musician who was finishing his science research in Baton Rouge, and I was raised in Lafayette. And my dad, Tommy Michaud, has a band of brothers called Les Frères Michaud, and I think they played at the Smithsonian back in the
Oh, cool.
90s. And it's him and four of his brothers at a time. We were a family of 10. And my brother and I started playing with Les Frères Michaud when we were teenagers. Before then, we both played guitar. We had moved back to Baton Rouge for his work for a little bit, and we were learning guitar, and my brother would be off at like football practice, which is like for a year or two. And I would go steal his guitar while he's gone and go try to learn the Jimi Hendrix Star Spangled Banner,
Right.
like start of the easy, start Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then pretty soon I learned how to play guitar for myself, watching him. And he was playing at like Tabby's Blues Box, Blues Jams when he was 15 years old. My dad would have to accompany him, and I was kind of looking up to what he was doing. And the whole time he was had joined Les Frères Michaud, learning guitar behind Uncle Bobby. And then when I was 14, I started playing stand-up bass with Les Frères Michaud. One of my uncles was out of town for a while, and they said, "Hey, we need you on stage. Here's the bass. Get to work." So on the job training.
Right.
And went a few years like that, playing triangle, guitar, and bass. And my brother, same thing. We'd kind of switch off as needed. And then when I turned 18, I took a French class in one of my half semesters of college, and I started looking into the lyrics of all these songs we've been playing with Les Frères Michaud. They have huge repertoire, hundreds of songs, and finally, the French started creeping in, and I started learning, like start with the Mardi Gras song, Chanson de Mardi Gras. And as soon as I started learning the lyrics, it was like I was filling a hole that I didn't know was there, because, and French has been the mother tongue of many of my ancestors, even on my mom's side, like the Sicilian side.
Yeah.
they turned French. They were from the French Quarter, and they turned French, and so much of my ancestry is from the French Quarter. And like the Michos came from Haiti, left after the revolution with 3,000, 10, how many
It
people?
was like 14,000.
Yeah, because it tripled the population of New Orleans, which that was like a few thousand.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we were one of them, went to Cuba for a while and ended up in the French Quarter. And like I said, my mom side is Sicilian, and all different, Spanish from the French Quarter who also became Frenchicized.
Yeah.
And so, French was a big part of most of my ancestry. And it got cut off a few generations ago, and my great-grandpa, who was the vice principal at Mamou High School, wouldn't teach his children French because he was in the First World War and part of Americanization.
Yeah.
And so my grandpa and them were some of the only kids raised in Mamou who didn't speak French. They knew how to cuss playground style, but otherwise they weren't allowed to speak French at home. And he ended up becoming the superintendent of education for the state of Louisiana. And in true Louisiana fashion, he never went to college, but he ran the entire education department for Louisiana. And he actually happened to be the one who signed CODAFIL, the Council for Development of French in Louisiana. And so, kind of full circle just in one generation, but he didn't speak French. But his sons some of them learned French on their own. And so I was raised hearing a lot of French, whether it be with them or at school with the older generations and such. So when I started speaking French, it really I was like, man, this is something I need. Like, this is something I'm missing. And I picked up my grandpa's fiddle. I hadn't played fiddle yet. I'd taken some lessons when I was younger, but, of violin. And I decided to go to Canada to learn French at the University of St. Anne. So I hadn't heard your story about moving to Ghana. And, it's kind of that same thing. It was like, okay, go to a sort of motherland, Nova Scotia I do have a tiny bit of Acadian, the Broussard side.
Yeah.
And learned the basis of French and brought my grandpa's fiddle with me. And it was kind of learning both at the same time, to speak French, sing French, play the melodies of the songs I've been playing rhythm to for years. And I ended up staying and hitchhiking around Eastern Canada, through Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, even to Ontario, and just really learning a lot about the language, giving a lot of solo time playing on the streets, kind of honing my chops a little. Still wasn't great, but I was getting it together.
That's cold up there, playing in the streets.
Yeah. Luckily it was summer.
Yeah.
I've done it in the winter, but and just had a really interesting experience and learned a lot. And when I got back home to Louisiana, I was able to learn and speak French with the people around me, and kind of absorb different dialects. Like one close person of the family spoke Creole. I spoke with her a lot. Everyone, so many different dialects in Louisiana. Some people speak kind of proper, some people Creole, some kind of Cajun, and it all informed the way I speak. And there's so many words and such. And I think one of the interesting things is that, once again, I was talking about this earlier today, that Haiti has kind of been erased from Louisiana's history for the most part. And like Lena's saying, you get back to New Orleans, it's all there, not credited so much. But even linguistically, my girlfriend is Haitian, and she was saying something the other day, and I was like, oh, we say that word as well. And I was like, oh, and people say, oh, it's not from Nova Scotia. It's one more thing that comes from Haiti that say, oh, it's Cajun, but no, it actually comes from Haiti. And there's so many influences constantly coming to light. It really changed the fabric of Louisiana. I mean, I wouldn't even be in Louisiana if it weren't for that,
Yeah.
I mean, the Michos wouldn't have been Louisiana. So linguistically, it became that became a large part of what I was focused on, was being fulfilled by.
Right.
And, you know, I started writing my own music right after then. That was 98. And then by 99, my brother had been learning accordion while I was learning fiddle. My brother stayed back in Lafayette, borrowed my uncle's accordion and was learning accordion. I was learning fiddle. So we started Lost Bayou Ramblers right after that in 1999. And we wrote our first song the first time we sat down and played. And I wrote quite a few songs in French that first round, that first summer,
Right.
and continued and been writing music in French ever since. And it is my second language, which kind of I see a bit of an advantage because I'm less self-critical,
Uh-huh.
you know. And I also love the poetry of French. I love writing French. It's really the rhythm of French is the rhythm of Louisiana French music.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can do it in English, but it's just so it all goes together. And that's when we started Lost Bayou Ramblings. And then a lot has happened since.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it got
Well,
started.
yeah, well, tell us a little about that band, the Lost Bayou Ramblers. Of course, you know, that's the band with which you won those 2 Grammys. So you're allowed to talk about that too. So.
Yeah. So my brother and I, we started in 1999. We did our first show in a little place called Cafe Rue Vermilion. Someone sent me some pictures for the first time this year of that show. I've never seen.
Wow.
You know, and it's us because we in Le Frabby show style, the family band, we'd always walk around. They'd get up and just walk around, do like a Mardi Gras deal. And following the tradition, we played in this little cafe. It was full of young people, which was not the trend at the moment. You know, It was like, it wasn't a trendy music. It was, and we were playing super traditional, like as Le Frabby show, stand-up bass, when pretty much, you know, the style was you had to have a steel guitar and an electric bass and drums. We were like going against the grain, playing traditional music at the time. And all these young people came and it was just super cool. We got up, we walked around downtown Lafayette. We went like into other bars and played, and then back to the place where we started. And it was just a really fun first gig. I happened to record it and we released it as a fundraiser for the flood in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And I recorded our first gig. So I was just, you know, a musician, always just trying to capture things. Yeah. Well, I was really thinking ahead. Yeah. And so since then, we put out our first few records with Swallow Records and Ville Platte, which had done a lot of the French music and such. And it took us about 10 years before we started expanding from just being a really traditional group, you know, and we were very traditional, but we were very focused on energy and rhythm, so, you know, we had real fun hopping shows. And then once we had put in like a good 10 years of being a traditional band, we started allowing naturally outside influences through some of our most local members. We recorded Mammoth Waltz in 2010, and it was a huge jump from what we were doing or anyone else was doing into something very progressive. And it was one of those kind of, you know, I was like ready for the local backlash. Like, what are people going to think, you know, and also not really caring because I loved it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it was so interesting, the different reactions, but overall people loved it and people were thirsty for something new, because in such a traditional movement, you know, with so much focus on playing the songs the same way, which is really, at that point, I say tradition is really just what was popular.
Yeah.
Like when Joe Falcon and Cleoma recorded Allons à Lafayette, they made it up on the spot. It was kind of based on some other things, but Cleoma Bro was such a revolutionary. She was doing so much new stuff at the time, which became tradition, but at the time it was very progressive. And it's like tradition is there's a lot of other things people were doing that didn't make it through because they weren't popular. So, you know, that was really kind of, it was a great to be able to offer something new to people who love our music and who've heard the same thing over and over, which we're all proud of that. We all love that. But how does something stay alive and relevant if it's not making new sounds and new music? So Mammoth Waltz was a big step for Lost Bayou Ramblers. And we had like Scarlett Johansson sing on it.
All right.
And Nora Arnazatter and Gordon Gano of the Violent Femmes, and
Yeah.
some, you know, it was very interesting collaborations. And it led to kind of us really, you know, of course, as big as when you have big movements and big success, that often kind of shakes things up. And we ended up losing a few members, you know, kind of wanted to take it more like, oh, we're doing this, let's take it more in that direction. And we're like, well, we're a Cajun band. Like, yeah, we did some fun things, but we're a Cajun band. We're not trying to, like, you know, what's your next step going to be?
Yeah.
It's like, we're just going to keep playing Cajun music, and we're still going to have fun with it. So we ended up kind of having some member switches after that, and it ended up being a great, you know, it was a tough transition, but ended up being a great transition because we still have the same band that came out of that change. And they're all from Lafayette, and they're all, like, as always, I always say, like, most Cajun musicians didn't grow up playing Cajun music. They grew up playing music,
Yeah.
and then a Cajun band needed a musician. You know, it's like, hey, you play guitar? Come on, that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
You know, so we have, like, you know, Johnny Campos, who's a shoegazer, if you will.
Yeah.
And he just released an ambient steel album on DFA, and then we have, like, Eric Heigl, who is our only New Orleans member, who plays with 79ers Gang, Mardi Gras Indians, and all kind of, so he brings his own influences. Johnny, Brian Weber from Lafayette, who just is a musical genius, who plays every instrument in all kind of styles. And we have Kirkland Middleton, who's kind of a, you know, young, punkish, rockish drummer from Lafayette as well. And then Corey Ritchie, who has been our producer since Mammoth Waltz, from Crowley, who grew up as a crawfisherman and now works with LCD Sound System, DFA Records, and all that. So, you know, all those guys have, since Mammoth Waltz, we've continued just to keep playing Cajun music, but be open to the outside influences and the inside influence of our other band members and ourselves. So, you know, it's just been really a fun journey. And that transition I was mentioning kind of took a while, and Corey and I started working on Kalinda in the basement of DFA Records in the winter of 2015. And we finished it 2 years later, right when we finally got out the rough transition, and we won a Grammy right after that. And it was kind of like the universe saying, here's your payoff for, like, just keep sticking to your guns and, you know, not letting people influence you to try to do something for popularity, and just doing what you love.
Yeah.
And so that was how Kalinda came about. And we really, you know, same thing, is very traditional, at the same time very progressive.
That was the I played on that record.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
They're on the
when we
title
started
track.
playing music together.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Because you must have come to my house right before then.
Yeah, I forget where we recorded it. Oh, we recorded at Dockside.
Dockside, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we start, and then we
Yeah.
finished it at Dockside.
Yeah.
That's
Because I was recording at Dockside at the same time.
that's true.
And you
true.
played on a bunch of
And
mics.
we on Day for the Hunter.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
exactly.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly. Yeah, that's definitely kind of where this collaboration
Yeah.
really started to take.
Very
Shake-
cool.
yeah.
Very cool. So, Louis, tell us a little about your recent solo project as well, your solo album, because I know that's gotten a lot of acclaim as well. So,
Yeah, during the pandemic, I had a lot of time to myself, and I'm as I think, Layla and I both are parents of 3, and you kind of get in that schedule where you're used to waking up really early and going to sleep early out of necessity, and I was waking up like, man, at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. during the pandemic, because I was just in this. It was the first time in so long I had just kind of been able to get into a routine, for better or for worse. Broke, but
Yeah. Broke, but in a routine.
yeah. No, no gigs, and then I was like busking on Instagram, It's like,
Yeah, we all were.
so,
We all were.
and Corey Ritchie had procured this houseboat he was going to turn into the studio, but he ended up starting on a new project, gave me the old houseboat. I was like, oh, I have nothing else to do. I'm going to refurbish this old houseboat. And it was on a trailer in my yard. And I turned it into my studio, and I had a 4-track quadraphonic reel-to-reel. And I put 2 microphones on the porch to record like the nature sounds. And I had 2 microphones inside. So I just started recording music just to do it. I was waking up with songs in my head. I had all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Between homeschooling my children, of course, so much time. And so I started putting new music, original music, and a few of them were definitely directly inspired by the Lomax collection,
Yeah.
including the first track on the album, Amor Ed, which was a song sung by Julian Hoffpower
Yeah.
from New Iberia, and it was just like he was singing a cappella, but I could hear this rhythm to his words. You're like, what is the silence bringing to this?
Right.
And so I made my own version of that, and also Le Beau Jour by Dabus Berard, also from New Iberia, who's actually my distant cousin.
Cool.
And so, you know, a few traditional songs and mostly original songs. And eventually I was like, okay, well, I think this is a solo project, which I'd kind of, you know, evaded that that turn in any artist's career. You know, I was like, I don't want, you know, but finally I was like, okay, well, I got to do it. I'm gonna put my name on it, and it's really glad I did, because it's really been a great new and exciting element to, you know, my music performances and having my own album. And then more recently, I've been playing solo. I did a tour just a few weeks ago through New York and Nashville and Chicago, and just playing just myself with a fiddle and guitar. And then now I have my solo band so the album, of course, is called Reb de Troubadour, The Troubadour's Dream. And Layla plays on that as well.
Yeah.
We do a Louis Moreau Gottschalk cover. That's the other cover.
All right.
Called Souvenir de Puerto Rico. And so, yeah, it's, I went into the pandemic I remember I wrote in my journal going into the pandemic that New Year, and I was listing the bands and what I wanted to do, and I ended up with 9 bands. I was like, okay, I was playing the Lawtell Playboys with Goldman Thibodeau, and just, you know, all kind of bands. So that's one thing the pandemic did, was really kind of changed so much. And for me, I came out of it with Lost Bayou Ramblers and then my solo project, and then Still Live for the Have Show and such. But, you know, it kind of really brought focus and allowed me to finally start writing my own music that wasn't for the Ramblers, or wasn't for my other bands, but was for me.
Right.
And so that's, you know, 25 years later, it's been really fun. So
Yeah. This sounds wonderful, and the album's great. So yeah.
thank you.
You know, one of the things that's really interesting about your journey and your website is your environmental advocacy. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Well, what you're referring to has got to be the Ivory-billed woodpecker.
Yes.
So,
and I'll tell you that a piece of that puzzle fell into place for me during this interview when you mentioned your dad was a scientist, because I clicked on the link and you get a scientific paper, and one of the authors is Thomas Michaud.
Exactly. That's what I was going to get at. So, you know, not only did my dad, you know, pass on the music to Andre and I, which he is a 5th generation accordion player, and Andre is a 6th. I play accordion now. My son Julian is now a 7th generation accordion player from Louisiana, and he also passed on his, you know, environmental ecological awareness as a wetlands biologist who did a lot of the research that published the hard data for wetlands erosion and such.
Yeah.
He flew a float plane, bring his accordion, and he'd be jamming with people along the coast, all the way down to Central America, but also Chandler Islands, Louisiana, Grand Isle, and just all around there. And most recently, I wrote this song, the Boscoyo Flow, on my birthday, which is I walked into this giant swamp across the street from my house that's usually dry, and it was very dry that day. And I walked in, it's real deep. I was just my birthday is like the day after New Year's Day. No one will see anything. So I walked and I found these, Boscoyo is the native word for cypress knee. And I found some cypress knees taller than me, and I found this throne that was made of cypress knees. I just sat in it, and I was just complete silence, like, I'm the king of nothing. You know, it was like there's nothing there, but I started thinking about the ivory-billed woodpecker, and the reason that it came about was because I was like, okay, I recorded the beats and the steel guitar, just all the tracks of the song, and I wrote these kind of French rappish lyrics that I I recorded all that myself, and I wanted one artist, and I said, I think Dickie Landry would be the one for this artist. And when he came to the studio, I said, hey, Dickie, do you remember in the 70s when my Uncle David was helping my dad look for the ivory-billed woodpecker, which had been extinct since the 1930s? He handed Dickie Landry this recording of the call the ivory-billed woodpecker, which was described by ornithologists like John James Audubon, who is also of Haitian descent, as a oddly tuned trumpet, or, you know, they kind of gave it this musical description. And so my uncle had given it to Dickie Landry, who performed it at a art exposition Documenta in Germany.
Okay.
And I said, do you remember that? And Dickie was like, I don't know, I could have done it. If you say I did it, I did it. But anyway, so I played him the Call of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker before he recorded on Bosco Flow. And so he starts making this air sounds of like the wind through, because I said, yeah, I'm sitting in this cypress Bosco throne, and Dickie speaks native tongue French and Louisiana French, and we start talking about the inspiration for the song. He's like, okay, so he starts making these air sounds, and then he starts making these bird sounds. Perfect, right up his alley. And then finally I said, well, let's just use the call in the song. So we start and close it with the song, and he's kind of playing call and response with the ivory-billed woodpecker. And you know, my dad, right at that same time, has still been looking and actually published these findings. He actually sent me some top secret text the other day of them with a flight of one through a drone. So it's they're finding it. It's hard to get the concrete evidence, but you know, what it ties back to is
Secret.
Yeah, I said it, but I'm not gonna. So you know, I think that the important thing and that's one element is, you know, the ivory-billed woodpecker, and other elements are, you know, that Louisiana is the fastest disappearing landmass on Earth, and that culture is tied to land, and the ivory-billed, you know, is kind of a metaphor for the old growth forest, and, you know, what we lose when we lose land, and of course the wetlands. In fact, the song that Layla and I recorded together for this project, the music, is a song my father wrote called La Valse de Mèche Perdue. It means the Lost Marsh Waltz. And it says, you know, when we arrived here in Louisiana, it was because of the marshes that we were able to stay isolated enough to not become Americanized. And now, with the marshes disappearing, how long until our culture follows the marsh? And so it's really about that tie of culture to the land, and, you know, protecting the land, especially in Louisiana, is directly related to protecting culture. And so many of the, you know, say the tribes who were pushed to the edge of Louisiana, they made the most of it. It's become this really fertile ground, but now they are the first climate refugees, the Ile de Jean Charles tribe. And, you know, so it's definitely a huge metaphor. And I mean, you know, and that's where Layla and I find ourselves as, you know, both being New Orleans-based artists. And it's just such a quickly changing landscape, and there's Katrina, and there's land loss, and, you know, it's all about, and that's what Katrina did, was really give people so much, okay, we got to protect this because we're going to lose it. And so,
and there's continued, you know, threat and
complete
kind of investment in gas and oil that continues to you know, destroy the land and continues this harmful cycle. And so the music definitely is a part of I think standing up to that.
Yeah. So tell us a little about this project, about the New Foundation and the Musique Nous Réunie.
Well, so yeah, New is a foundation based in, I guess, elevating and giving a platform for French in Louisiana, and through the various dialects, whether it be, you know, French society in New Orleans, or native French speakers and the Native Americans and the Creole and Cajun, all the different dialects of peoples who embrace French in Louisiana. And they have been doing some really cool work, and they wanted to make an album that highlighted the different dialects, and they did a great job. I got to listen to test pressing a week or two ago in their apartment on Royal Street, and it came out amazing. And like our pieces, so Layla brings.
Well, they had invited us separately
But
to contribute, songs to the record, and I was just like, yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden, Louis was calling me and was like, hey, we should play on each other's songs, and I was like, yeah, 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 great. And then we got in the studio, and I was like, oh, we're making a movie, cute, and we're being interviewed about French language and French influence and Creole and all of these things that we incorporate into our music. And I will say also during in the early parts of the pandemic, um, Louis and I started to play more music together. Like when there were live performances, I was like guesting on, some of the Melody Makers shows. And so we have just like this body of work that kind of organically came together, and we really enjoy playing together. And so it felt very natural to be like, okay, we'll play on each other's songs in the studio, and that'll be more dynamic. So that's really how this collaboration came together. Specifically, I mean, we got to go to Paris last year with Corey Lede, and we were playing as a trio and collaborating with Haitian drummers there. But this particular concert feels like the true like manifestation of all these years of collaborating with each other, and finally we're like, okay, we got a duo, and we're like writing a set list and putting on a show. Whereas before it was like kind of like me guessing on Louis stuff and him guessing on my stuff, and now we're just kind of like, well, maybe this is a thing. And so it's very emergent.
Yeah.
Like in this moment,
it's true.
we're finally starting to be like, okay, this is a duo thing that maybe we should invest some more time and energy into actually supporting it. And the new foundation, their project really serves as the perfect backdrop and sort of jumping off point to whatever might come next. I mean, what we're going to present tonight is a lot of songs that we've both been playing for a long time, both together and separately. But yeah, that's kind of what's happened, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great point because it's true. It is emergent, but at the same time, it feels like, oh, it's like we've been doing this,
We've been doing it for 10 years,
but
but we just
it's true. Like it feels like it's such a natural, organic progression because we have been playing music together a lot, but it's always been, like I said, me on your band, you with my bands, and other
right.
ensembles and such. And now it's just us two, and it's kind of been like it's been happening for a while, but it is actually kind of the first. It's
Yeah.
definitely the first time we've recorded together.
Yeah.
And we only recently have played just you and I. One
Right.
time Corey couldn't make it,
Right.
so we did this, and then and there's still room for
And
everything.
yeah, I mean, it goes to show that sometimes you really do need like a curatorial sort of voice that's like, this is a good idea and I want this to happen. And I have to give it up to, Scott
Yeah.
Tilton of the New Foundation for really engineering this plan, because once you're invited to do a show at the Library of Congress together, then you have a real duo.
We're a band.
Yeah, you're a band.
Well, and we feel very fulfilled by this also because we awarded a community collections grant to the New Foundation that helped them produce this
To make
project.
this record,
And so
yeah.
we feel like we've had a small role
Yeah.
in continuing your collaboration. So we're really happy
That's
to be able
awesome.
to say that.
Again, thank
Yeah,
y'all.
thank
And thank you.
Yeah.
And I guess we've gotten to a good point to wrap up. But if there's anything that either of you wanted to say that we didn't get to, this would be the time. Anything else? Any other?
I would say that just to give a more full representation of the album, which is we're representing here with the Library of
Right.
Congress and New, but the rest of the music, I got to hear the test pressing, and it was amazing because it really does represent some of the dialects, the Creole, the Cajun, the Senel, the like more standard French, the Creole, and it's really a great representation of the different peoples and the different circles and communities in which French exists in Louisiana. And so we're really honored to be able to represent that here at Library of Congress.
That's great. And those recordings, of course, will come here to the Library of Congress to be preserved forever as well. But it's great to have them out on a record that people can actually hear them in the real world. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and any final thoughts from you, Layla?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would just echo what Louis is saying. Like, we are two representatives of a large movement that is, you know, this particular project is based in Louisiana. All of the artists on the record are fabulous, and we all have so much to learn from each other. And the fact that we keep on, mining these traditions in this language means that there is, signifies that there's really something to preserve and to celebrate. So excited to
Absolutely.
be here to do that.
All right. And we can't wait for your Louisiana French and Creole concert to be a little bit later tonight. So, Layla McCullough, Louis Michaud, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.